Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. This week I want to talk about the subject of trust. And before you change the channel, hang with me, because I'm going to approach trust from a little different perspective. Many people, their eyes gloss over when you start talking about wills and trusts. And I'm afraid that that's true even for some of our regular listeners. Because if you know the area well and you've taken care of those things, then often you're less interested in hearing more about it. And I get that. But it's just irresistible for us to periodically circle back and kind of talk about the machinery of estate planning, of making that last third of your life, the final act, the third act, making it better, making that all the things that you hope for when you worked so hard and prepared so well in those first two acts of what is a three-act play called your life. That's the metaphor we use. So I want to dwell more specifically on trust because they tie in not only with the period beyond your death when many of you, most of us, care as much about what happens to those we care about in this world after we're gone. We care as much about that as we do about the quality of our life during that last third of our life, for example. But that's not true for everybody, and I get it. Some people, they're confident that the people they care about most in this world are well taken care of, everything's in place. They don't feel that they have to play a financial role in any way in the quality of life of people they care about thereafter, or that will live perhaps generations beyond them, maybe even grandkids that they will not have met, or great grandkids. But others, I understand. Others think, look, this is important to us. We really want to focus on that sort of preparation. Yes, we want to use the will. A will plays a role in part of this multi-pronged arrangement for estate planning. The will continues to be an essential component, but really all the action is not with the will. All the action is with the trust. And that's especially true for those people in that category that I just described, the people who are quite confident that things are going to go well for the people they care about that remain in this world. And to be fully inclusive, those people who there's really no one they care that much about in this world, meaning that they may not have kids, may never have been married. So for them, when the subject of estate planning comes up, they're checked out because they're just thinking, look, I'm not concerned about that. Or they could be in the category of people who they do care about people in this world and beyond and thereafter when they're gone, but they're not concerned about their financial well-being. So I want to speak to those people, the people who really are not wanting to give as much attention to the people they care about in this world, about the benefit they can provide them when they're gone. And I know that's a growing number. Let's face it, the world is changing, and demographically, we know that the fertility rate now is I think it's 2.0 in the U.S., which among industrial nations is high. 2.0 is still not enough for replacement. I think replacement is 2.2, 2.3. We may have dropped below 2.0, which is the average number of childbirths per woman in the country. I think that's the fraction they use to calculate that. But in other countries, it's atrocious. I mean, I think it was South Korea that was nearing or going to drop below 1.0, and Japan we know is a crisis, their situation. So it is a phenomenon that's occurring across the West. Industrial nations are the worst. But it's not the only reason that this phenomenon is occurring, where you have people that are less family focused. Yes, they have smaller families. More people don't have any kids. But also, there's this diaspora of sorts in the 21st century, especially, something that, of course, gained momentum in the 20th. But in the 21st century, it's just presumed that if you do have a nuclear family, for example, you're not going to have it for long, because the kids, in all likelihood, are going to live somewhere else, because there's not the gravity that existed in one time in the particular city where they were. Employment opportunities now are truly diverse, more international than ever before. I don't think that's going to change. So when you separate families geographically, it has an impact on relationships, I'm afraid. and not always, generalization, but this is a factor, I think, in this phenomenon where some people are less interested in the estate planning from the perspective of providing for their loved ones. And I can't fail to mention, again, what I said earlier, and I think this is probably the key component as it pertains to those people who do have children, is that often their children are self-sufficient. They're doing very well. I have two girls, a doctor and a lawyer. They're doing fine. So I think for that reason, some people are less concerned about the financial well-being that is something for which they're responsible for assuring after they're gone. So again, the focus of this show is about trust. It's about showing you how important trust can be to your life from a position of self-interest. And that really, I'm tempted to say that's almost the best argument for trust. But of course, that's not an accurate statement because trust can accomplish so much for so long, so many generations now. You have dynasty trust, so they can go on to children, grandchildren, great-grandkids, and they provide all sorts of tax advantages and other things. But a huge advantage of a trust and a reason for this tranche of people, this category of people that I'm referring to need to especially know about trust are the people whose primary interest is in the quality of their life for the balance of their life. So if you're in that category, if you have relatives that are in that category, you should understand how hugely important trusts are. Let's face it, so much effort is placed on financial independence. You hear about that. Many of you plan for it well. You have, those stages of your life from the time you began employment and beyond. Many of you, to varying degrees, have been saving money. You've been investing. You've retained various experts to tell you, gee, how should I do this? How do I max my 401k? Do I consider converting money in my IRA into a Roth? I mean, a lot of thought goes into maximizing that value, the number, some people call it, the number, as I think there was a popular documentary to the effect that what is your number, meaning the amount of money that you need to live the quality of life you want to live for the balance of your life. And for everybody, there is a number. They may not know what the number is, but there is a number that would give them the standard of living that they expect and hope for when they retire. So all this attention, all this effort is going into, gee, how do I maximize that number? They may not even know what the number is, and this probably describes most people. They don't know the number that they should have to achieve that goal, but they want to maximize the number. And so that seems to be the agreement of all thinking people about their future. So you spend these first 2/3 of your life giving a whole lot of attention to maximizing the number. And of course, when you go into retirement, you want the number to be good too, right? So it's not as if you go into retirement and you give up that goal of maximizing your, for lack of a better phrase, your net worth, the resources that are available to support you for the balance of your life. But here's the problem with that obsession, that monofocus to the exclusion of at least one other essential component to that vision. And that's having in place the structure to assure that if things go a little sideways for you, whether that occurs early in your retirement or it occurs in the latter stages of your life, it's not a very improbable thing to expect. And that's that there will be a point when you cannot run your life. And I think everyone is prepared, all fair-minded people are prepared to admit that. But many are not prepared to give much thought to it. And as a result, things like trust are neglected by people whose, I'll call it this world interest, people whose this world interest, meaning who are wanting to maximize the quality of their life up to the point of their death, those people fail to consider that that number means nothing if you don't have in place the machinery, the structure, some stability that will assure that you are able to effectuate that for yourself when you can no longer run it. And again, I don't want to dwell on the many ways in which that can become your situation. I think you can imagine those, family members where they've had a stroke, they've had a car accident, they've come down with something that that came at such a pace that they didn't have time to scurry to set some things up. Many people believe that, well, if I get near that, if I see that point coming, then I'll go and set those things up. Typically, you don't see those points coming, and often they come at such a slow pace. It's what's that phrase? A boiling a frog? Is that? Have you heard that phrase, Justin?
Yeah.
There's a better one. That is silly.
I don't know I know the concept.
Yeah,
I keep thinking a watch pot never boils, but that's not it. But yes, there's a frog one.
Yeah, it is. You get the concept too. So it's like things come on, and people, yes, there are points from the time that maybe in those cases they had some notice, and there is that category of stuff, but they still don't act. And it's because I think that it's occurring at such a pace that they keep telling themselves, yes, I can act, and suddenly they can't. So trusts are the centerpiece of a plan that will reinforce the number that you have. It will protect the number, this quality of life aspiration that you have. You can't simply say, I need to accumulate the money, and if I have the money, I'm good. You're not good. And that risk actually goes up every year that passes in that third act. And you know this. Some things I know you can figure out on your own, so I don't like to speak down to my audience at all. I know our audience, for the most part, you've college degrees or graduate degrees, you're professionals, you're successful in businesses. So we feel we know our audience reasonably well, but I know that there's some things that we just choose not to think about, all of us. And I think that the subject of planning to protect the number, which I'm using as a metaphor for the quality of life that you intend to have for the last third, it's just a huge error, and it's unforced. I mean, you clearly have the ability to do this. The cost to do it is a small fraction of what you're protecting. And it's not as if you're managing for a hugely improbable risk. Some people don't buy life insurance because they think, the probability of my having a premature death is so low that I don't want to pay for the premiums. Well, for most of you, I would disagree with that, but it's not a silly thought. Let me say that. But I think it does become silly for someone to talk about the risk that is far greater. And that's not the issue of an early death. It's the issue of sometime before you die being incompetent. And incompetent, choose your definition, but I think we can all agree in practical terms that it means you cannot effectively run your life, whatever the cause, illness, some auto accident, whatever it may be. We can all imagine scenarios. That circumstance is not very improbable. And in fact, it's hard to gather these numbers. I've often thought I'd love to be able to gather the information to calculate those people who found themselves in a position where they're in this world for a good while longer, or some period of time longer, often a good while, and they're utterly at the mercy of others. And it was unforeseen. Sometimes it's very foreseeable because of some types of illnesses but the bottom line is, I know that number's big, and I know that number's growing. Our ability to keep people alive has outpaced the ability to keep them alive in a healthy, functional way. It's that lifespan versus health span, that gap. And that gap is a problem. And medical experts and longevity experts recognize that at least as much attention has to be given to the quality of life that one has in their extended life as it is to the extension of the life. But what we're talking about here today is something that there's a good chance all of us will go through some period of time like that. And the fact that if you're representative statistically of what numbers I've read regarding our society at large, probably less than 20% of you have a trust in place. And a trust, what I'm about to tell you is just, adds information to what I've told you before. If you've watched this channel regularly, you know some of these arguments. And as human beings, we often hear stuff that we know we should do. I'm describing myself for sure. that we know we should do, and sometimes we don't do it for a while. Hopefully we eventually do it, but sometimes we put off things we know we should do. But this is huge. I mean, this is, if we're making a list of priorities, allowing for something that is not very, if at all, improbable, and focusing so much on the number. And I'm going to impute to you that you've cared about the number, that you've spent a lot of your life thinking about assuring that you have the funds in retirement to be able to live. And I'll impute to you the expectation that you expect to live a good life under those circumstances. You don't want to eke by, and you don't want to be in public housing or all those scenarios that we know some people face in older age in these circumstances. That wasn't your plan. So when I'm calling the number, I'm imputing to you that you cared about that and that you've spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I'm suggesting to you that if you're among that substantial majority that has done that and yet has not put in place something to assure that you've maximized the things now that you have the financial resources to do, that you've not taken the steps to give full meaning to this. I won't call your financial goals your life mission. I won't impute that to you, but I will impute to you that this was a huge priority for you throughout your life. And for some of you, it was your life mission. But in any case, it's important. And the idea that there's just not in place something to where you will know that whatever happens when you get out of bed this day or any other, that the plan that may kick in at that point, it's not going to be your plan A. It's going to be your plan B, C, or D. But the point is, it'll be the best plan possible. And you'll know that you have that plan covered, whatever it might be. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what a trust is. And I'm talking about, incidentally, exclusively from the perspective that I have chosen for this show. And I'm not talking about the benefits to your children, your family, huge as those are. Those get lots of coverage. So I'm not going to cover them at all in the next few minutes. But a trust is really, it's the chance to create somebody who can function as a CEO for your life goals under the circumstances where you can no longer run your life yourself. We could use lots of metaphors to make this point, but I kind of like the idea of a CEO because, it's a broad range of functions. It does mean that, this person has a fiduciary duty to care for you. There's somebody who has a lot of responsibilities, much of which they delegate. It may seem too vaunted to refer to them as a CEO for some of you who may think of your circumstances, your finances. The number for you may be sufficiently low that you think, this doesn't work for me. Then I'll come up with something different for you. But the whole idea is, you want somebody who you give the keys to the kingdom, you give them authority, like a CEO has authority, to do lots of things. It does involve trust, but not empty trust. I mean, these are somebody that you've chosen. There's a whole regulatory framework governing a body of law, essentially, that governs the behavior of this person. So it's not as if you've called up your cousin, Jim, and said, Jim, will you run things for me? And he says, yeah, I got it covered. It's not that. This is where you have somebody that you've placed in a position of authority, you've formalized it. There's a whole set of laws and responsibilities that person is undertaking. You may let them pay themselves something, maybe not if the relationship is such. I always think that's a good idea, to pay them something. It could be somebody that's a family member, often is, depending on, for you, the size of your estate, we'll call it. But it's not at all unusual, though, to have an independent person. And this person could be through a trust department at a bank. It could be a lawyer. It could be a CPA. It could be somebody whose honor you trust, who probably also has insurance, another advantage to using a professional in this role. But I realize some of you, may be looking at, say, $1 million in value or less. And And for you, you may think, well, I don't want to pay what at that level would probably be 5% or so a year. Well, it could be less than that. It could be 3 or 2. But the point is, the lower the number, the higher that percentage is. And so some people say, that's not realistic for me in that scenario. Now, remember, you're not paying them for this role until you have given up your seat as CEO of your life. This is only in the circumstance where you've given up your seat. So it's not as if when you create your trust, you're paying them for 20 years until maybe at that point something happens to you and then they step in. No, you pay them from the moment that they assume that role. So for some of you, if the number were so low, but the 5% was necessary because you don't know anybody else personally that you would trust in that way, then you have to be willing to pay a larger percentage to a professional when the number's smaller. But for those who have a larger number, we'll call them the number, meaning that would include all your assets. It would include anything that's investable in some way. So for those of you above $2-3 million, your numbers definitely are coming down. The management for this role is maybe 2%, maybe less. It's not. It can be a little more than simply being somebody who is managing your assets through an equity fund or through a mutual fund. It's a little more than. It's more responsibility than that. But anyway, this is something that is negotiated between you and this person, whoever it is, or this institution. But the whole idea is to put somebody in that position that you trust. You want to have that person to be named as your successor. So your CEO now of your life, you've always been, though your wife might or husband might suggest otherwise. But in any case, you've managed your life, and you may continue in that role to the day that you leave this world. But the reason we're having this conversation is there's a good chance you won't be in that role till the day you leave this world. And you either now create the structure by which your life can be governed, your resources can be governed according to the rules that you want to be applied. And you can have the force of the law and courts and whatnot, should they be necessary. Nobody wants to end up in court with your assets. But my point is, this is not a casual handshake deal. This is something that you can go to the bank on, literally. So this is the scenario where you have somebody who can be in charge versus something happens, and you know what the alternative is? Really, it's chaos. Meaning that if you have a wife that's alive, husband alive, then granted, that person can come in and do things for you. And if that relationship is good and that person has good judgment, then that's probably the person you would choose for this role. But another advantage, even in that scenario, is that even that person cannot just immediately go to work to manage your resources, even as a spouse, as to all your resources. You, believe it or not, your spouse or somebody would have to go to court to open a probate estate while you're alive because they need authority to get at things like retirement accounts and other things that they don't otherwise have authority. Being a spouse is helpful for assets on which they're listed as a co-owner, then that's fine. And then I know that includes a lot of your assets, but it doesn't include probably all your assets. Not to mention, it won't address new obligations that will come up, new contracts, payments that are due on existing contracts, whether it's utilities, on rental properties. Think of whatever things you're involved in where you've signed a document and you've undertaken an obligation, or somebody has an obligation to you that you want to enforce. It's not, somebody being your wife is not automatically in a position to step in your shoes any more than I am as to many of those things. Now, again, just to be clear, if they're on an accounts with you, then then certainly they have authority that a stranger would not have. But my point is, even in that, what I think is really the best of scenarios you can have where you haven't done any planning and you've been struck by this thing, whatever it is, and you have this loving spouse who is capable and who is devoted and who can step in and start doing things for you. What I just described to you is about as good as that scenario can get, But remember, it's a scenario that's very fragile. Even the scenario I just described and the huge flaw it has, the many things that person cannot do without going to court and getting a judge to give them the authority, even that scenario is vulnerable because that person, we don't know how long their health will hold. We don't know what circumstances they may face, whose influence that person may come under. So even that's a fragile situation, but that situation is probably about as good as it gets. Second would be kids who are smart, competent, responsible, devoted, and they're available, meaning they can't be living on the other side of the continent. I mean, it makes it certainly more difficult, but they're there and they have the time. Let's throw that in. They have the time to give to managing your life and your resources. Yeah, that's probably the second best thing. But, it's a fragile thing to hang the balance of your life on. We may be talking about decades, but very probably we're talking about years. So it makes so much more sense to simply take the steps that you can take to assure that when something happens to you, everything's in place. And it's like when you lose power, it's like having a generator in your house. It's funny, I just thought of this example. We had a storm recently, and we were seeing people's lights going off around us in the neighborhood, and this has been one of those seasons for that. And all of a sudden our lights went down, and my wife and I think, now we're out. And then just in like seconds, like 5 seconds, they come back on, and we hear our generator that I hadn't thought about. We hadn't had to use the generator, it hadn't had to come into play, and it did. And so it's like there was no problem because things went on as they otherwise would. And that's kind of the way you want this to work. You don't want there to be a period of 6 months or more when there's litigation in court over who should be running your life for you. Some of that litigation, incidentally, is self-interested, but some is out of devotion to you, but still disagreement with others who may have the same interests. So you don't want that. You want the moment that something happens, you want in seconds, you want somebody to have the ability to immediately go to work on your behalf. And that's all we're talking about. Now, the centerpiece of that is a trust. But you don't want to trust alone, meaning there's like 3 or 4 documents that would kind of work synergistically. A durable power of attorney for healthcare, definitely want that. Hospitals are very uncomfortable when there's not either a medical healthcare directive or something. When there's not something in place, it makes them nervous because, they listen to families, but if they make a bad decision because of what a family member has said, when there's no document that gives that family member authority, like removing machines or not doing certain procedures or doing certain procedures, they're vulnerable, and they've been sued later by other family members who said they shouldn't have done this, or the person can even recover and sue. So hospitals are nervous with that. It's better to have in place a healthcare directive, better than that, a durable power of attorney for healthcare, which is much more comprehensive and inclusive, where you can express your preferences, et cetera. It's so simple to have that document. It doesn't cost much. That I'm assuming many of you have in some form. And let me repeat, that's better than a healthcare directive. A healthcare directive is specific. Often it's applying to only the hospital in which you signed it. So, much better to have this other in place. Another thing that's important is a durable power of attorney generally. So some people call it a general durable power of attorney. And that gives broad authority to someone to start doing things on your behalf. And it addresses one problem that we've talked about. And that's the problem of, is there somebody who can immediately do things, move stuff around, make payments, pull money from places where it's needed, to do all the things they need to do as if they were you. Well, this durable power of attorney can accomplish that. So it's hugely important. But you have to remember, the best characterization for that is it's a blank check. And maybe a blank check is better than no check. And I guess I would say that on this subject, meaning that if you stopped at those 2 documents, you at least have the possibility for someone to go to work on your behalf, and you've given that to somebody that you think that you have reason to believe you can trust. But I have to tell you, there's so much at stake here. You've worked so hard for this number, something you've thought about for 2/3 of your life, and now you want to sit back and have the confidence that things are in order. It's just not good enough, and it's sloppy, for lack of a better way to put it. There's just no rules in place, and lots of things can be done with some with good intentions, some maybe not with good intentions, but in both cases, not good. And I mean, those things can happen and do when people just hand out this blank check to somebody, to where when you can't sit in that CEO seat, you've essentially gotten somebody, and the CEO metaphor doesn't work anymore because there's not the structure of fiduciary duty and responsibilities. There is a fiduciary duty, but I'm saying there's no management structure that exists in this corporation metaphor that I'm using when I talk about a CEO. It does work when we're talking about a trust, but it just doesn't work when you hand somebody a document that says, yes, you can act on my behalf to do anything you want. The law does, again, for those of you who have heard this before and think I'm failing to acknowledge, yes, the law does require that person to act on your behalf. There is a rule, fiduciary duty, that when they have this, they're supposed to act on your behalf. But that's about it. And there's not a lot of oversight, and it's just a very messy way to conduct your affairs. The assets, incidentally, remain in your name, so you don't have the protection from third-party litigation and other things that you might otherwise have. But it's better than, in my opinion, assuming you choose that person well, it's better than doing nothing. If you don't choose that person well, it's not better than doing nothing. It's worse than doing nothing. So the trust, just to flesh this out a little more, and this is not a show where I'm going to dedicate it to explaining all the benefits of a trust. I want to really make a very important point to you as emphatically and graphically as I can, and that's about the importance of having a trust in its broadest terms. And I think hopefully I have accomplished and will accomplish that through this show. But through subsequent shows, we'll talk about more of those details and those technicalities of trust. But the main point for you to get here is that a trust is a means whereby you can have in place a set of rules that you've chosen. You can place the assets can be placed in the name of the trust, and should be, with some exceptions. This person will have the ability to run your life as if it were assets of a corporation. This really is a good metaphor. It's a little imperfect in some ways, a corporation and a trust, but it's really a pretty good analogy. So all those assets that are within that trust are within the control and the responsibility of the trustee. And the law imposes duties of reporting regularly to the beneficiary, whoever that is, and you're the beneficiary while you're alive. So all the assets are used exclusively for your benefit. There are investment rules about how the money should be invested, et cetera. All these things, this entire body of law and protection is available to a trust, and 90% of that is not available through a durable power of attorney. But you want the durable power of attorney also because, to the extent you have some things that are outside this corporation, using that example, you want that same person to be able to manage those. And sometimes it'll involve getting those within the trust. It requires special rules. Others will involve taking some things out of the trust. But the point is, you have a CEO that has complete powers, a full range of authority, but yet a lot of rules and a lot of oversight if you build that in, and it's very easy to build that in with a trust. You can have a trust protector appointed. Remember, you name your successor trustees, so in case something happens to that person, they can be replaced. You can have reporting and should have reporting required to certain third parties. And often maybe having the authority of a trust protector. So there's so many things you can do, and none of this is, in the scheme of things, very expensive. And it doesn't mean that just rich people should do this. I hope it's clear to you that if you have a number that you care about, whatever that number is, you need to have a trust in place. And you need to have the ancillary documents that kind of together create this full circle of protection for you. So you put those two things together, the number, meaning the assets and all the things you've done to provide for the quality of your life, when you retire until you pass away, and then the framework to assure that you're protected during the period of your life when you're by far most likely, we could even say, destined to suffer some period of time in which you have to step out of that chair, that CEO's chair, and you have to let somebody else occupy that. You don't want to just have your cousin Bill, to stroll in and to start moving things around with or without the best intentions. It's not a good scenario. So I hope I've set the stage for you to think about how huge a trust can be in terms of giving you peace of mind throughout, not through just part of the last third of your life, but throughout the final third of your life. That's what this show is about. We want to maximize your quality of life during that period. I hope what I've said to you has stimulated those of you who haven't gone to the trouble to go out and put together that package, those documents that assure that now you have in place the things to give you the best quality of life, whatever that is, the best quality of life that you hope for. And with that, I hope you've enjoyed this show. I hope it's been beneficial to you. Until next time, this has been Life's Third Act. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed Life's Third Act, sponsored by Cordell & Cordell, your advisors for estate planning and beyond. Subscribe and join us weekly for thought-provoking discussion and topics exclusively focused on estate planning and your financial future. Discover more at CordellCordell.com. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.